So this means that I have to go back and change that experience map, the one that goes from learning to promoting to sponsoring. I had some animations in here, but they got clobbered last night. So pretend like the blue bar moves from the spot where supporting is, slides over, and that conversion point extends downward, and all of a sudden we have a new stage called supporting. That's what happens here. I needed to examine the experience of the people who could do more, who could put the UX on the project, the designers, the researchers, whatever that is, umbrella term right now. So that conversion point to promoting looked really complicated. And as I started to dig into this, I realized it was a whole stage in itself. It was that stage before somebody stakes their reputation on UX in their company, and they're bought in silently. They've seen the value proposition, they understand the concept enough to say, I support this. But they're not yet ready to tell everybody about it, okay? What's interesting now is that if we look at this generally, this allows us to talk about the adoption experience of everybody, regardless of their role in the organization, which is really key. So there's nothing on here that's specific to business developers or vice presidents or project managers or me. And that's why we can keep working on this for the people with those business responsibilities. So after examining the needs of those people who are supporting and have not yet started talking about it, I separated it out and I took that sponsoring one and I made a separate process for that for those people with the business responsibilities. That's a specific branch off of the supporting stage. So they're at supporting, they're bought into the idea, and now they start on this separate process for their business responsibilities. This is kind of like, I'm gonna use the word paperwork a couple of times. They start, they believe in the idea, they start looking for a project. Maybe that's a trivial exercise because they have one, or they own a project, and so they're going to put UX on their own project. That's the simplest case. They look for an application, then they prioritize. They have to figure out, based on their immediate project or a couple of projects, what is the right priorities in terms of all of the money that should be spent on the project to make it successful. They have to go through that kind of business benefit cost analysis. There's a conversion point after that where they decide they're going to go through with it. They have to fill out some paperwork. Maybe that's, they just have to sign something, to sign a requisition to bring somebody from another part of the organization or to hire somebody new. There's paperwork involved in that. Or maybe there's actually a change request. We call them engineering change requests, and so there's that stage of paperwork in processing, okay, where they're going through the business processes to make this happen. Fourth, then they're including. That means that paperwork has been finished, there's a new designer on the team, there's a new researcher on the team, and UX is now included on that project that didn't used to have it because that project manager is now supporting. And the fifth, excuse me, on this stage, or in this branch, and final stage is that sponsoring one that we saw earlier. They've reallocated funds. They're not using the money that maybe they're underrunning and so they can add another person to the project. They're reallocating funds and they're saying, I believe that a software developer is going to contribute less to the ultimate success of this project than a user experience designer. And that's the heart of sponsoring, is that reallocation of priorities. It's easier said than done, but that's what demonstrates to us that they are sponsor of UX, and that we can use them, then help them go back up to the previous branch, help them to not just be supporting, but talking about it and talking about how awesome it is on their project. Okay, a couple other things that have come up since then. We needed a little bit more context around the conversion point. And so we thought of the idea of momentum in that there's kind of this natural sort of, it's like the paperwork. When somebody's signing the paperwork, eventually it'll get processed or rejected, but it'll get processed and then the new requisition will open or the change request will get approved. And so as a matter of course, now the UX is included on the project. That idea came up on a couple of other stages as we looked at this and we saw what was happening with the project managers around us. And so we added this idea of momentum to say that as somebody understands the concept, they start to internalize the value proposition as well, and it kind of guides them through the next stage of the journey. It doesn't leapfrog, but it even kind of pushes them along through the conversion points as well, which I think is an interesting idea, especially when you look at where the momentum stops before the conversion point in sponsoring. To say that if they've used extra money in the budget on a project to pay for UX, it's not necessarily going to be the case that they may never take that extra step and say, I'm going to make whatever staffing changes I need to grow UX on this project because it's so successful. There's not really that momentum there, the way it is through the rest of it, kind of pushing through the business process and things like that. So I think that the idea of momentum may just help us frame some of the questions that we ask when we ask, how do we get somebody over the hill to convert from learning to supporting, or supporting to promoting, or prioritizing to processing? Okay, the last thing, and probably the most important thing on here, is we're going to bring in an empathy map. We just saw one in the previous talk. Belmore showed the empathy map, and so that's exactly what I mean here. What is the adopter thinking, feeling, doing, saying, all that stuff? We're going to call that the evidence. That's the evidence that we have that they're in a particular stage. And that's really important because we need to know what stage they're in if we're going to help them along the process of adoption. Consider if we don't do this, if we don't record this evidence. An executive comes asking for a few weeks of consulting or maybe a few days of training for the software developers on his team. What is he actually thinking that we do as UX practitioners? Do they really understand the intricacies of an in-depth contextual inquiry or mental models or information architecture? The worst thing we could do is give them what they want without making sure that we understand what they're asking for. That's what that evidence is for. And the reason why we have this evidence is because the purpose of this is so that we can intelligently design the next conversation that we have with these individuals to move them along the experience map. So I got tasked to build a UX team in a division in Virginia, but what do I spend most of my time doing? Customer relationship management. I follow leads. I track conversations, I track expressed needs, expectations for a next meeting. I'm always setting up a next meeting with somebody. It kind of looks like sales. We'll call it customer relationship management. It's more personal. And their willingness to buy, their willingness to pay. And like I said, I want to intentionally design every interaction that I have with those customers so that I can get them through the experience map, because ultimately I want them to put UX on these projects. I want to tell them what they need to hear, not necessarily what they want to hear, but what they need to hear from us to get them to the next stage. And I want to make every conversion to supporting as easy as possible. Supporting is where that branch starts, so that then they can start paying for it and they can go through the business process to make it happen. I could even help with the paperwork, because that's what a good salesperson would do. And so far, I've found that everything I need to know in order to do all of that is in the experience map, in that empathy map part, the evidence that I record. So here's the current version of the template. It is going to change because I know I'm going to get some good feedback after I show everybody this. The primary branch is for everyone. The secondary branch is for those with the business responsibilities to add UX to projects. The empathy map stores all that information about what the person says, does, thinks, feels, sees, hears, is pained by, stands to gain. And let's zoom in. There's the first part. You can see on the left those categories of the empathy map. You can see on the top the stages that we've talked about. It's expanded so that you can see all of the rows that we're putting all that evidence in. And it could be as big as it needs to be. I mean, I've got it formatted so that it barely fits in a PowerPoint presentation. Theoretically, this could be this giant spreadsheet where you're just recording every single conversation that you have with somebody so that you know exactly where they are. And sometimes they'll be in multiple stages at once, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And the other side of it, that second branch for the people with those business responsibilities. They're scouting for an application, prioritizing across projects or within their own project. The third conversion point, processing the paperwork. including UX with using extra funds and the fourth and final conversion point, and then finally that sponsoring by reallocating funds.